We all seen the jokes. Workers at Cadillac in 1974 somehow making an 8.2-liter big block produce 112 horsepower. GM designers making a big block with only 200 horsepower. The big block Chevy is slow. That's why everybody LS swaps it out. It's a big hunk of metal, it's a boat anchor, it's slow. Or, at least, that's what the internet wants you to think. But what if I told you that the internet was wrong? Yeah, shocker, right? They are big, they are hunks of metal, they're surprisingly very effective as a boat anchor, but for dirt cheap, you can make some serious power. No, I'm not joking. There's this dude on YouTube named Richard that makes them make 4-digit power numbers for less than 5,000 bucks. Can't guarantee you'll get 30,000 miles out of it, but if you're building a 4-digit engine, you're probably not driving it to Target. So, if power is so easy to make, why do big blocks get such a bad rap? Well, buckle in, cause you're gonna get a little history lesson. Also, little mini ad for myself, YouTube pays almost absolutely nothing. There's a reason this is only something I do on the side. I got my small business to run in the daytime, but right now, for some reason, I'm obsessed with making passive income the only way I know how. I take photo and video for a living, and I sell these photos on Redbubble. Canvas prints, posters, and hats, apparently. You can get a cool photo, and I get some money for a wedding ring fund that I'm working on. It's a win-win. Links in the description below, plus there's tons of stuff for you Hot Wheel freaks out there. Check it out. Let's take a look at the history of the big block. 1958, for example. Chevrolet made the small block, and it was great. Sure, there were a few design flaws, like that hot pocket. But overall, it did a great job of making cars and light trucks move quickly in comparison to anything else at the time. But GM needed something for the big old trucks and passenger cars. The small blocks could spin pretty fast, but when you're trying to pull a load or move a K10, you're not going to be going above 5,000 RPM. They needed torque, son, and in the 50s and 60s, you got that with longer stroke or bigger displacement, in this case, both. Using what they learned with the small block, the engineers got to work, and I assume while snorting a line of coke said,
"Oh, should we leave it alone? Should we back off? Should we play it safe? Nah, you think let's make it bigger!"
And thus the big block was born. There are a few iterations: the Mark I, the Mark II that only saw racing, the Mark III that never left the design floor, the Mark IV, which is the most popular one, the Mark V, which exists, and the Mark VI, where you can still find in junkyards everywhere. When these big blocks joined the scene, they were hot motors, getting swapped in whatever old car you could find. Trust me, you haven't lived until you've ridden a T-bucket with a big block. 2,000 pounds, 400 horsepower, you got a vehicle that thinks traction is optional. And when the gentleman's agreement was lifted in 1970, these big engines got put into muscle cars and a star was born. Then it fizzled out like 3 years later. Why? Well, it actually is a number of things. One, in 1970, California passed a bill that required automakers to advertise with net horsepower instead of gross, starting in 1972. What does that mean? Well, pay close attention, because if you haven't taken economics yet, you're going to need to learn some new terms. Gross is the measure of total, while net is the total minus deductions. In economics, it's like this. You get 15 an hour. You work 8 hours. 15 times 8 is $120. That's the gross amount of money you make that day. But you gotta remember, the government wants to put its grubby little paws all over the income you just earned. So do a little math, let's say 20% for ease. 20% of 120 is 24. 120 minus 24 is $96. Oh, I burped. This makes your gross income $120 and your net income $96. It's the exact same thing for horsepower. Your big block is 400 horsepower. That's gross. But if you include other things like the water pump, the alternator, the AC compressor, power steering, and more, those devices cost horsepower to operate. 3% here, 5% there, and all of a sudden, you're down 100 horsepower. That's why some people will remove these devices, instead of opting for electronic power steering, electric water pumps, removing AC, that whole shebang. They want to free up that power. Now, this is already bad enough, but it gets worse. Your big block is already only at about 300 horsepower. Not actually slower, but marketing definitely takes a hit. People are starting to wonder why there's a 25% drop in power even though the car doesn't move any slower. It's frustrating, but you can handle it. PR's got this. All you need to do is explain it. After all, people have famously been able to understand basic concepts like this. So, what happens next? Well, there's this little thing called the gas crisis. Here's the brief history. Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. Nixon sent money to Israel. OPEC didn't like that, so they put an embargo on their oil, which made oil scarce stateside. No oil means no gasoline. Suddenly, your average US buyer doesn't want a fuel-hungry big block. They want more efficient cars, and they want them now. Instead of designing an engine from scratch, Chevrolet wanted to make their older engines more efficient. How can we do that? Smaller cams, smaller carbs, smaller power. Drop that horsepower number to 200 net. While this is all going on, there's this other thing called the Clean Air Act of 1970. Now, no matter how much you love these cars, there's no denying they pollute like a mother, your mother specifically. Yeah, you can make a case saying it's actually better for the environment by driving an old car instead of buying a new one every few years, yada yada yada. Shut up, I'm comparing just these two. A Prius puts out less pollution than a Chevelle SS. If you decide to end it all in a garage, a 60s big block will knock you out for good in about a minute tops. A Prius, you'll wake up a few hours later with a mild headache. For legal reasons, don't try this at home. These are both obviously exaggerated for comedic effect. Spoilers YouTube channel takes no responsibility for any suicide attempts made by you or by those you love. You have been warned. Basically, the air stunk. Babies were getting born with birth defects, people were getting cancer. It was a pretty bad show. I love old cars. I also love living in a world where I'm not dealing with acid rain. Fun fact, we actually don't deal with acid rain that much in the US anymore. We got a good handle on it, partially because of the Clean Air Act and its amendments. And we're making even crazier power numbers while keeping the air clean, so as far as I'm concerned, this act was a good thing, just took a while to reap the benefits. Anyways, part of the 1970 Clean Air Act required cars to cut down on tailpipe emissions. This meant catalytic converters had to be on all new vehicles starting in 1975, which was perfect because crackheads came about less than 10 years later, and the two have been inseparable ever since. This new addition to the exhaust system meant that there were further obstructions, and as many of you know, a free-flowing exhaust is a powerful exhaust. So, now you got this catalytic converter, the mufflers, and a smog pump soaking even more horsepower from this already weakened engine. And this isn't like the modern versions of these are the original versions where performance was second in almost every regard. With all this, drop that horsepower from 200 net all the way down to around 150 horsepower. And it gets worse. Part of the Clean Air Act was also getting rid of leaded gasoline. For those of you that don't know, lead was added to gasoline as an octane booster. This permitted automakers to run higher compression ratios since spark knock and pinging were less of a risk. Off topic, that is the only benefit to getting gas with a higher octane rating. You're not helping your car if you're getting 93 when it only requires 87. You're not getting more power, you're not getting better gas mileage, you're just losing money. The only time you should use it is if you modified your engine to have a higher compression ratio or if you're adding forced induction. Read your manuals, people, it'll save you cash. Anyways, with the absence of lead, older engines were starting to wear faster and ping. New engines had to make up for this lack of octane by dropping compression ratios, which killed power even further. And lo and behold, your 400 horsepower big block is now only making 100 horsepower. It's not even counting the horsepower loss to the transmission, drivetrain, and rear end, so some of these engines were likely in the double digits at the wheels. All this together led to big blocks gaining the reputation of being these huge, inefficient engines in internet culture today, which is sad because that's just not the case. The 70s were a rough time for all automakers, and big engines suffered the most. It's like asking an elephant to climb a tree. That's not what it was made for, it's going to do it terribly. But don't let this video scare you. These pushrod V8s are a phenomenal base to start your build with, as they've been around for a good 60 years. You could basically buy 500 horsepower kits for less than 5,000 bucks. Even the smog engines are great. Add a little ring gap, some eBay turbos, and you'll have something that takes advantage of that awful low compression. Even here in California, which has some of the strictest smog laws, if it's a car from before 1975, you can drop in any engine you want and mod it however you please. This means any cam, any carb, any exhaust. You can make it happen. Thanks again for watching. I appreciate it. Remember to check out my Redbubble linked below. I hope you have a good one. Peace. For legal reasons, don't try this at home. These are both obviously exaggerated for comedic effect. Spoilers, YouTube channel takes no responsibility for any suicide attempts made by you or those of you. For legal reasons, don't try this at home. These are both obviously exaggerated for comedic effect. Spoilers, YouTube channel takes no responsibility for any suicide attempts made by you. Come on. I can do this. For legal reasons, don't try this at home. For legal reasons, don't try this at home. These are both obviously exaggerated for comedic effect. Spoilers, YouTube channel takes no responsibility for any suicide attempts made by you or by those you love. You have been warned. Oh, first try.